Right, happy to carry on?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes.
Ms. Smith, thank you. Thank you for coming back to us.
Thank you.
Can I go back very briefly to a whiteboard picture that we looked at this morning? I just want to ask one or two, I hope, simple questions.
Okay.
That's MET 0001696. And it's the entry in green, which you said you wrote in relation to flat 193. I just want to get an idea of the time at which if we can, at which you wrote that up on the board. First of all, can you help roughly with when you think you wrote that up, judging by when the whiteboard system started?
No, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell you whether that was when it initially started or later on.
Okay. Now we have there are three calls that came into the control room from callers in relation to flat 193, and I'll just give you the times.
Okay.
25109, 030206, and 030509 in relation to that flat. Does that help you fix a time in your mind as to when you wrote that up there in relation to flat 193?
I can only assume that it would have been one of the earlier calls, because after, when they've written told to leave flat, if that had happened at the same time, I probably would have written that too.
Right. Okay. Okay. We may have to check that by reference to the transcript, but not now. Now, can I ask you to go back to your statement? And go to page 3. And you say on page 3, three-quarters of the way down the page, and it's just below halfway down the third paragraph on that page. You say, I listened to and assessed both Pam and Peter's calls. Both calls indicated that the situation was getting worse in terms of smoke and heat. Owing to the developing factors involved, namely the duration and nature of the situation, I became increasingly uncomfortable with the stay-put policy, the national policy for high-rises. And just pausing there, I want to ask you about listening into these calls. First of all, how many calls do you think you listened into? Is it, you say it was both Pam's and Peter's. Was it 2 calls?
So that was initially, yes, the 2 calls. So I'd asked the supervisors who had been on the calls the longest, and it was really to go and support the CRO, or the control room officer.
Okay, so my next question was, why did you decide to listen to these calls? And
that was the reason, to support the control officer, because they'd both been on calls that were lasting a long time.
Right. Now, I wonder whether we can just find an example of that. Can you tell us, first of all, before we show you an example, how soon after your arrival in the control room did you listen into those calls?
Within minutes.
Within minutes.
So I would have gone to the back of the room, I would have spoken to the supervisors. I'm sure they would have been, well, they were very busy at the time, but I would have said what can I do, and who's been on the telephone for the longest.
Right.
And one of them would have said Pam and Peter. And as Pam was sitting nearest, I went to Pam first of all.
Right. Did you listen to the 2 calls, as it were, at the same time? Did you flip from one to the other, or did you finish one off and then move to the other?
No, so I went over to Pam. Like you've mentioned before, control staff wear a headset, and if you're near in that proximity, it is quite easy to hear what the caller is saying to
right.
Pam. I sat down with Pam and made sure she was okay, and I asked her to ask her caller several questions about how the conditions were in the flat, their location, and where they were. And Pam did this and repeated the caller's answers back to me.
Right.
And that's that's the same with Peter.
Okay. In terms of the mechanism, the actual mechanics of listening to the calls, you've described a bit of that just now. Did you have your own earphone that you could hear through?
No, I was just next to her.
I see, right.
Just close next to her.
Okay. Had you any means yourself of being able to speak to the caller?
No, I could have listened in electronically from another position.
Right.
But it was easier and quicker to go direct and speak to them.
Okay. And how long did you listen to the calls for? Starting with Pam, how long did you listen?
Enough for Pam to give me an idea of what she'd been telling the caller, where they were, and what advice she'd been given, and for them to ask if the conditions were deteriorating.
Right. Okay. And so enough to give you an idea of those things, roughly in minutes. How long was that?
A minute and a half.
Right.
Yeah.
So that sort of time. And what about Peter? The same?
The same.
Right. Okay. And do you remember who or what sort of people the callers were in terms of gender or age or anything like that?
I think Pam's call was male, but I couldn't be asked that. It was really to assess the situation with regard to what the callers were experiencing.
Okay. Can I ask you then to look at just a part of a transcript? Are you okay to look at a transcript? We're not going to look at the whole thing.
No.
And it's LFB 0000677. And I'd like to look at the first page, which tells you that it lasted 59 minutes and 44 seconds. And I'd like to go to page 98 within it. Sorry, I should say, before we move off that page, can I just identify at the top of the page, the call looks like that it starts at 01:38:38. Now, can we just then look at... So that gives you an idea of when it started. So you weren't in the control room at that stage.
No.
And if we can go to page 98, we could see it lasts for just under an hour, so it lasts until 20 to 3 or so. So you'd arrive in the control room during this call. Is that right? That would be right if that's
yes.
timing's right.
Yeah.
Okay, and at page 98, perhaps we can go back to the previous page. We can see the conversation between caller and operator. At the top of the page, operator says, "You're going to try and get out, yeah?" Caller, "Pardon." Operator, "You're going to try and get out." Caller, "Try and get out of the building?" Operator, "Yes, okay. Can you try that for me?" And then caller, inaudible. Operator, "If your dad said there's no safe left in the flat for you. There's no more safe place here," says the caller. Operator, listen to me a minute." Caller, "Yeah." Operator, "Can you hear me? Right, your dad said there wasn't anywhere safe left in the building in your flat. Is that right? Listen, yeah. Operator, is it right that there's nowhere safe in your flat?" And then over to the next page. Caller, "No, there's nowhere safe, there's nowhere." Operator, "Right, if you're telling me then there's nowhere safe, I need you to try, sweetheart. I need you to try to get out, yeah?" And then other, there's another voice. "Tell them they have no choice. They have to," and then there's over speaking. And then the operator says, "Hello, hello, hello. She, they're gone. Are they? Yeah, okay, thanks, bye." And then if you look at the next page, I think that may be the end of the call. Yeah, okay, that is the end of the call. And I just want to ask you about other. Can you help me with what's happening there when we see other? Tell them they have no choice, they have to, over speaking.
So that would have been someone I would imagine in the background. That could have been me after we've changed the decision
Right.
to evacuate.
Okay, that could have been you.
It could have been me.
Okay. All right. Okay, all right. Now, going back to your statement, you say, owing to the developing factors involved, namely the duration and nature of the situation, I became increasingly uncomfortable with the stay-put policy. What had made you become increasingly uncomfortable? You say owing to the developing factors, duration and nature of the situation.
Yeah.
But what do you mean by the nature of the situation?
So I think what I'm trying to say here is that the duration of the calls and the deteriorating situation.
Right.
I was uncomfortable. I know it says stay put policy, so that must have been something said, but to clarify, I was uncomfortable that people were remaining in their flats and we were trying to protect them in their flats when it was clear that that protection advice wasn't working and it was failing.
I see. Did you have any views or thoughts at the time that by that point compartmentation within Grenfell Tower was failing or had failed?
Yes, that was a consideration. Like I say, the 45 minutes was an indication that it would be close to failing by then.
Right. And did that have an impact on your thoughts about the stay-put policy and the wisdom of holding to it?
Yes.
Right. Would that mean that you'd need to start getting people out immediately?
That would mean that we would start to tell callers, instead of asking them to find a clearer less smokier place in their flats, that we would actually be advising them to leave their premise.
Right. At that point, when you became increasingly uncomfortable with the stay-put policy, did you make, or did any of your colleagues in the control room make any inquiry of the incident commander as to what their thoughts were on the ground about compartmentation failure and the wisdom of sticking to stay-put?
No. So they were all taking calls. They were all on the phone. There wasn't anyone to contact the incident ground, but by that time, see, Jason Olaf was on the phone to CU7 and Adrian Fenton was having telephone conversations with officers at the incident.
If you had wanted to speak to the incident commander directly,
Yeah.
could you have done that?
Yes, I could have rung him on my mobile phone. Whether he would have answered, I can't be sure.
What about the
during that
airwave?
incident.
Okay, so taking it in stages. At this stage, when you're becoming increasingly uncomfortable, how soon after your arrival was that?
5-10 minutes.
Okay. Did you know who the incident commander was at that stage?
I can't recall.
Okay. Does the name Richard Welch ring a bell?
Yes,
In what way does it ring a bell?
I know he's a senior fire officer.
Did you know that did you know that at 0204, according to the short incident log, he had been made incident commander, according to the log?
I know he made pumps faulty, so it would have been, I would have assumed that he was the incident commander.
Right, you'd have assumed that he was the incident
Yes.
commander. Do you remember being told or finding out from the short incident log whether anybody had taken over as incident commander from Richard Welch?
No.
Do you remember the involvement of a DAC O'Loughlin?
I do remember that we had an informative message from him.
From him? And what was
Yes.
that? What was that message? Do you remember what that
No.
was? Okay. We do have in the incident log, and there's no need to look at it unless you want to, at 021658 a make-up CU8 from DAC O'Loughlin, make FRUs 10. Does that trigger a recollection?
No, I thought it was an informative message, so a longer one containing the building size.
Okay. Right. Can I ask you to look... Sorry, this is a very slight diversion of the theme we're on about changing the statement, but just I'm trying to put it in time. At short incident log, page 23, we have an informative message, just following up on your answer just now. At 024203, we see informative, SAD, Sharon Darby, SUP, SUP, CU8 from DAC O'Loughlin, and then there's the rest of the informative message there. I should have asked you earlier, what's SUP, SUP?
It's just a code we use in the control room to indicate that there's an informative or a message being sent that the supervisor should read.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So you'll see some makeups that have IUP.
Yes.
It's an instant upgrade.
Yes.
It's a way of prioritising those messages and who they go to in the control room.
I see. That's very clear. So this message you would have read, presumably.
I believe I was standing and overheard it come in on the radio.
Okay. And what would the fact that the message said CU8 from DAC O'Loughlin, a residential block of flats, etc., etc., what would that tell you about DAC O'Loughlin's role?
I would assume from that he was the incident commander at that time when he sent that message.
Why would you assume that from those words?
Because that's how our messages are constructed. So the message always comes from the IC.
Okay. So, right. Coming back to the point at which you begin to get uncomfortable with the stay-put policy, was it possible for you to get on to the airwave radio to Group Manager Welch as the incident commander, or DAC O'Loughlin if he had become the incident commander by then, and say to them, what's happening on the incident ground, because I'm not comfortable with what I'm hearing from callers?
It would have been unusual to speak directly to them via the airwave or handheld. I don't know what channel they were listening to, but I would imagine they would be using fireground radios and talking on a command channel rather than over the main scheme radio. So that wouldn't be an appropriate way to contact them. Had I phoned them, they might have left their telephone with someone on the command unit, because usually when we ring the command unit to ask the incident commander, we don't speak directly to him. Someone takes a message and then we'll ask the incident commander directly and then they'll come back to us.
I see.
So it's not common practice for control to talk directly to the incident commander. It can happen if they happen to be on the command unit at that time when we ring up and ask them a question, and if they're not busy dealing with the incident.
Okay. Was it physically possible, as a matter of mechanics, for you to get on your airwave radio and contact, or at least attempt to contact, the IC commander, either Welch or O'Loughlin?
I could have physically tried, but they wouldn't. I doubt if they would have responded.
Right.
They weren't monitoring the main scheme radio channel before, I don't believe.
Right. If you had wanted to speak to either of those officers directly, urgently, to pass on what you were now seeing and hearing in the control room, could you have done it?
Yes, well, we did. So Adrian Fenton was in the room, and he was on the phone to several senior officers that could have passed that message on, or he might have been talking to those directly.
Right. Now, you say in your statement in the next sentence, I spoke with Adrian Fenton, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner responsible for the Brigade Coordination Centre, and said that we should think about changing the policy whilst he was in the middle of speaking to ground crews. Now, first of all, how long, roughly, if you can help with that, after Adrian Fenton's arrival, did you have that discussion with him?
Almost immediately, whilst the whiteboards were being set up,
Okay.
and he was on the phone to the incident ground.
Right. So this discussion, is this right, predates, pre-times the start of the operation of the whiteboards we were looking at today?
I think they'd started, it had already started, so I think Adrian's first role when he came in, he was moving the whiteboards around and writing up information. I arrived, I think, 5 minutes before him. I was speaking and I'd gone over to listen to Pam's call, and then Peter's. Peter was situated in front of the whiteboards, and that's where Adrian was based.
Right.
So after I'd listened to Peter's, I could speak directly to Adrian.
Okay. And are you in the main control room?
Yes.
This is not downstairs in the Brigade Coordination Centre?
No, because of the number of calls and the information, Adrian based the BCC to begin with in the control room.
Right.
In the corner of the room.
I follow. Okay. And when you say I spoke with Adrian Fenton and said that we should think about changing the policy, were those the words you used?
I'm not sure I said I think, or I said we need to.
Right. Can you remember, as best you can, what you said to him? Reliving the moment.
I think I said we need to change.
Okay. What do you know? What
policy?
he said?
I don't even think I said policy. I think I said we need to tell people to get out, to leave.
Okay.
From my recollection.
Okay. And what did he say? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think we had a short discussion about how we may go about doing that. I think I'd overheard whilst I'd been talking to Peter, or maybe it was slightly after, Adrian had been on the phone to the incident ground, and he had relayed or was speaking to them about crews not being able to get past. I thought it was the 18th floor. So shortly after that, I said to him.
Okay. Did he agree with you that, just using the expression in your statement to start with, the policy should be changed?
I don't recall having a decision where we said, yes, we agree. I think it's more of a coming together. So with my experience within control and fire survival guidance calls and callers, and Adrian's knowledge of the incident ground, I think it was a general acknowledgement that that is how we are feeling in control, and he would relay that to the incident ground.
Okay. Now you say... Okay. Did you get a sense from him that he agreed with you?
Yes.
That people should start getting out? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And do you, from your knowledge, what was the basis of his agreeing with you? Do you know why he agreed with you, from your perspective?
I think he was in control. He could see the calls, he could hear the volume and hear what people were telling the callers. He knew some of the situations that some of the callers were in. So I think he might have picked up on that and realised that that was a very educated decision that Control had made. So I was happy to agree with that. I also believe he might have seen images of Grenfell on fire.
Yes, right. And you say in your statement, whilst he was in the middle of speaking to ground crews, and you've just told us the same just now, do you know who Adrian Fenton was talking to on the ground?
No, I don't.
You don't know
when it says ground crews, I believe there were senior officers.
CU officers. Right.
Senior officers.
Senior, not
senior
CU.
officers,
Right.
not
Do you know whether Adrian Fenton was speaking to the incident commander?
I don't. I would imagine he would be able to speak to the incident commander.
Right. And how would he be able to do that?
He was doing that on his mobile phone.
On his mobile phone?
Yes.
Not radio?
No.
Okay. And would the mobile phone be his brigade mobile?
Yes.
Okay. Would it record the messages? Or?
No.
Right. Now, you say in your statement that he was informed that crew were unable to get past the 18th floor. He, I think, says that there was information about, or you had information about not being able to get past the 15th floor. Do you remember whether it was the 15th or the 18th?
That could have been it could have been the 15th floor.
Could have been the 15th, right. And was that the first time you heard that?
Yes.
What did you think about that?
That it was an awful situation.
Having been told that crews could not get past the 15th floor, did you take any steps to advise the control room officers, operators, actually handling calls, as to what to say to callers?
When the change of advice, when we changed the advice,
Yeah, well,
are you saying?
let me take it in stages. Having learnt from Adrian Fenton that he was being told by senior officers on the ground that crews couldn't get past the 15th floor, or maybe the 18th, but
Yeah.
a floor to get to the top of the building. Having been told that, did you take any steps next to tell CROs as to how to advise callers calling in?
Yes, so that was all done at the same time.
It was all done at the same time.
So it was the same time. So we'd heard callers that had been on the call for a long duration. I'd spoken to Adrian and said about changing the advice. He'd said that he'd heard from the incident ground that they couldn't get past the 15th floor, so that decision was made.
I see. Okay.
After that.
That's very clear. So the decision was based in part, I think you're saying, on the fact that you'd now learnt that crews couldn't get past the 15th floor.
Yes.
Right. Now, at page 4 of your statement, in the first paragraph, or first main paragraph on that page, you say, with resources struggling, crews unable to get above the 18th floor, and Adrian already engaged in protracted communications with ground units, I made the quick-time decision that policy was to change, and advice for CROs was to start telling people to evacuate the building. I'd arrived at Stratford at approximately 2:15 hours. Within 10 to 15 minutes, the decision was made to change policy, and that decision was mine. This would have been at approximately 2:30 to 2:35. And then you explained the decision and being made due to a variety of factors. Now, in terms of that decision, was it you who decided to change that stay-put policy?
Yes, but again, during that statement, the police said who made the decision. So I just said me, but it was a decision where I'd spoken to Adrian, and together we'd agreed that that was the right decision.
Okay.
So I'd raised the decision, I'd raised that I wished to change it, and together we decided that that was the most appropriate action to take.
Right. You say you did this as a quick time decision, and you give your reasons. What do you mean by quick time decision?
So within 10 to 15 minutes of arriving,
Right.
we had decided to change that guidance.
I see what you mean. So in other words, you made it very soon after you arrived.
Yes.
On the basis of the information you saw it, rather than spending hours cogitating over it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you say after that the decision was made owing to a variety of factors: the duration of calls, the content of the calls, and the resources available. These factors and my years of experience formed the basis of my rationale and coincided with the recommendations following the Lacknell fire in 2009. in which certain questions were asked by the CROs regarding smoke and fire levels. Can you just explain how the recommendations following Lacanau played a part in how you came to make this decision?
Yeah, so one of the recommendations in Lacanau that you see in both policies 790 and 539 is the fact that during certain circumstances we may have to change the advice. And that came as a result of the Lacanau inquiry.
I see, okay. And we saw yesterday in 790 and indeed in GRA 3.2 about the circumstances in which the advice would have to change.
Yes.
So do we take it that the circumstances you've set out, duration, content, resources, those are all the factors which fed into the change in the advice?
Yes.
From where you were, you'd arrived in the control room at 2:15, the decision was made 15 or 20 minutes later. Did you have any thoughts at the time about whether that decision that you made could have been made earlier?
Not on that night when I was in the control room. Have I reflected on it later? Yes.
I'm not asking about your later reflections, but on the night, I think you said no. But I think so you didn't say to yourself, why is this decision only being made now?
No.
Okay. Did you discuss with anybody in the control room why the decision hadn't been made earlier?
No, and I think I tried to explain yesterday with the CROs taking those constant calls, and many very harrowing and distressful. The supervisors were still mobilising appliances. They themselves were taking calls as well. It was very noisy in the control room. We had a downlink that was on from the police helicopter, so there was additional noise. We had the whiteboard set up, and that rhythm of communication that had started already. I wouldn't imagine that anyone could have an oversight and step back because they were all very task orientated, which was rightly so, to supply the incident with the resources they need. So I didn't query why that decision hadn't been made earlier. I didn't think that that would be something that would be considered earlier. I was the only spare person that arrived then that could then talk to individuals and find out what they were telling people.
Just following up a couple of things from that. You say that the control room was very noisy because you had a downlink on from the police helicopter. I thought, and this may be wrong.
Not just for that.
No,
not just for that.
No, I understand. But I thought that the heli-tele link wasn't operating at Stratford.
No, sorry. So we were able to, I think we received a call from the police and they asked us to switch to what was called an ES channel, an emergency service channel 3, on our radio, so we can hear what the police helicopter are communicating.
Right. When did you switch to the ES channel?
That was on when I arrived.
It was on when you arrived. Do you know when that was switched on?
No.
What is...
I believe there's a call from the Met Police asking us to switch that on at some point during the incident.
Okay, now in terms of how that channel is heard, it's audible to everybody in the control room, is it?
Yes.
Because you say it's adding to the noise.
Yeah.
Is there a speaker it comes over?
Yes.
And what recipient is that speaker attached to? Is it a radio or a telephone?
So it's what's called it's an airwave radio, much similar to the ones that are in the fire engine cabs, and it is on a desk in between two supervisory positions.
Right. And what you say it uses emergency service channel 3. Is that one of the channels? We've heard about channel 1, we've heard about channel 4, and we've heard about channel 6. Is channel 3 one of those that you can...
No.
I see.
So
what's channel 3?
So there are different talk groups and different channels allotted to those talk groups. So emergency service channel is a channel where all the emergency services that are attending that incident can use. It goes via a request from the police to set that up.
I see, okay. And where do the messages come from that get broadcast into the control room through that channel?
So the police asked us to turn to ES3, and we did that, and that was because the helicopter that was up was passing messages. I believe they were going to their own control room, but we were able to listen in.
Oh, I see.
And I believe in the early hours of the morning, we were communicating with them about an individual trapped on the 11th floor.
Right, okay. And just so I'm clear, I think I asked you, where do the messages come from that get broadcast onto that speaker? Am I right in thinking from your answer that they are actually messages sent from the helicopter to the police that you can listen into?
Yes, so it was that night. It could be used for a range of incidents. It just happened to be the police helicopter was communicating on ES3 that evening.
Okay. And do you remember whether that method of communication or those messages were audible to the control room? I think you said before you arrived they were.
Yes, I'm pretty certain it was on before I arrived.
Okay, you don't know you don't know when they started?
No.
Okay. And were any of those messages that you could hear, did any of those messages that you could hear factor into your decision to change the policy and advise callers to get out?
No.
Right. What did you learn, if anything, from hearing those messages?
Like I say, I think there was a number of messages. I think we had reports of callers that were on the roof, and that we maybe, you'll have to confirm with one of the supervisors, we maybe asked them to confirm that, because we'd had reports of that, and I believe the police had. So whether they were able to check that out and let us know that that wasn't the case.
Right.
And again, there was some communication between our control and the police helicopter later on, or in the early hours of the morning, regarding someone trapped on the 11th floor.
Right. You told us a moment ago, when I asked you about whether the decision to change the stay put advice could have been made earlier, that there was no one essentially standing back with an overview. And I hope I haven't misinterpreted or mischaracterised your evidence, but the question I have arising out of that is, would there normally be somebody in the control room who would be able to stand back and look at what was going on and make a big decision?
So if there was one or two fire survival guidance calls, I believe you showed it when you pulled up the supervisor riff, that on there it's an instruction for someone to support that CRO as their call taking. So that could have been a supervisor, it could have been another member of staff, but there's that support for them. They're able to process that information and take other instruction with what's going on in the room.
Right.
But because we were just overwhelmed with calls and actions,
from your
that didn't take place.
I'm so sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just saying, just because of the large-scale incident and the amount of calls and everything, that didn't take place until I arrived.
Yeah.
I could have logged on to a position and got involved in taking calls, but I made a conscious decision not to, for that reason.
And is it right that you reached that decision without seeing any media or TV images of the building on fire?
Yeah, I don't believe I'd seen any by that time.
Right. Had you looked at any images at all from news apps or anything like that?
No, I think the first time I saw that is when both Adam and Scott arrive in the control room.
Right.
That's when the discussion takes place with regards to the TV being on.
When you made this decision to change the advice being given by CRAs to callers, did you have any idea of the physical conditions inside the building in general terms?
Well, I think
sorry.
we all knew they were dire, and that's why some of our advice when we talk to our control room officers, we say that, you know, it would be, callers are very reluctant to enter worse conditions or smokier conditions, and that sometimes that would require us to be very forceful and blunt with them to get them through those conditions. So whilst I wasn't aware, we could all hazard a good guess what it was like.
Would you like a break?
No, I'm fine.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll carry on for another 5 minutes or so. You say...
I think we should have one before too long.
Well, let's say 2:45, not 5 minutes.
Or
so.
when convenient.
Yes. You say in that last answer that you think we all knew they were dire. In the absence of any information or any detailed information coming from the incident ground, how did you, or how could you form a picture of the conditions of smoke, heat and fire within the building?
Because it was obvious on the control operators' faces that they had talked to callers, that they could no longer contact anymore, and that they could guess what had happened to them, and that the smoke conditions were worsening.
Did you get any idea of, from the CRA's conversations with callers, that the callers had actually experienced the conditions in the lobbies or in the stairwell, as opposed to their own flats?
No, so I believe during the initial calls that people say they cannot leave because of the smoke logging in the corridor or it's smoky in the corridor, but those conditions were entering those flats as well.
Right. And would it follow from that that when advising callers to get out, you might be sending them into conditions which were smoke-logged and hot?
Yes, we knew that, and that's why we instructed all the control officers to tell the callers to get blankets and towels, to wet them, to cover themselves with them, to keep low, and more importantly, to hold hands as they left so they wouldn't lose each other, because visibility would probably be nil, and that they should just head to the stairwell.
Yes. And in terms of balancing the risk between staying and leaving, in terms of the advice that was being given, did you think that you had enough information about the conditions in the escape route, such as it was, to be able to give that advice?
No, I just knew the alternative.
Okay. Did you or any of your control room colleagues seek information from the bridgehead or from the incident commander, through the incident commander, about the conditions that the crews were experiencing?
No.
Was that something that could have been done?
Yes, we could have done that. But I believe at that point that was the only alternative.
Right. So are you saying that there would have been no point?
We're saying if we'd known the conditions in the stairwells and security, we still would have been advising them to get out due to the reasons I gave earlier.
I see. So I think what I'm getting from this is really there wasn't a question of choice.
No.
Do you think that might be a good
Yes.
point?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I think we ought to have a break now, just for 5 minutes. All right. Would you like to go to the ushers? That would be great. All right, 5 minutes, please. 10 to 3. Thank you. All right, I can
Yes.
carry on.
Good, thank you. Ms. Smith, can I just go back a step and ask you about the timing of the change of advice, or
Yes.
your personal decision? In your statement, if you go back to page 4, in the first paragraph, 5 lines down from the top, it says that you would have made that decision at approximately 2:30 to 2:35. Now, I wonder whether we might be able to be a little bit more precise about that. Do you remember I showed you earlier on this afternoon a transcript of a long call which started at 1:38 or so and ran for 59 minutes and
Yes.
44 seconds. And towards the end of that transcript, we looked at it. If there was somebody speaking, remember, and you said that might have been you.
Yes.
Now, on the basis that that call ends at about 2:37, do you think that your decision was made after that time, after you'd heard that call and participated in it?
No, I think it was made before. So I think it was made before. We would have gone round to all the control officers. Alex went round to all the control officers, gave them the advice, told them that that it had been changed, that we were now going to tell callers to get out and to leave the building. And I would have then gone round just to support the CROs, and one of them would have been Pam, so that would have been where I would have said.
Right. Why do you think that you would have made that decision before the call, or before the end of that long call we looked at earlier?
As I said, I wouldn't have told Pam to give that advice without speaking to everyone to ensure that we were all giving the same advice. So I wouldn't have said to Pam on my own, tell them to get out or whatever, if that was me,
Right.
before I'd had that conversation with Adrian and before I'd spoken to Alex.
When we looked at that call earlier, I thought that you had explained to us that that was one of the calls where you were listening in, or might have been one of the calls that you were listening into and assessing.
Yes, but that wouldn't have been that time. That would have been after. So that if you have the transcript, that would have been before, when I was listening in.
Right. Perhaps we ought just to go back to the transcript. It's LFB quadruple 0677. Sorry, quintuple 0677. And the other, this is right at the very end, so we can time that at about 2:37. And when you say, or when it says, other, tell them they have no choice, they have to, and the call ends. Just help me with, we can tell what the timing is. I thought that that was one of the calls which you were listening to, which helped you decide whether or not to change the stay put policy. Is that wrong?
Yes, no, that is right. But
Right.
earlier on in that call.
I see.
So I would have listened to it earlier on in that call than that bit.
I see. Okay. Why do you say that? What makes you confident that that is the case?
Because Pam responds with certain questions. Sorry. The caller, the operator asks certain questions that I've asked, and I'm sure you can hear that in the transcript
I see. Okay.
earlier.
You're familiar with this conversation then, are you? This long call.
I've listened to every call.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Going back then to where I was, which is page 4, second paragraph of your statement. We've now know what decision you made, the basis for it, and more or less the timing of it. Can you just tell us how that decision, which you made and then discussed with Adrian Fenton, was communicated to the incident ground?
That would have been via Adrian.
Via Adrian. And do you know who he spoke to?
No.
Do you know why the change doesn't appear on the short incident log?
Yes, because I never added it. I didn't have a position to log on to add that. And as I say, the supervisors were busy, it didn't occur to us to log that change. The priority was to get round to all the control officers and let them know of the change, which we did.
Would it not have been easier for somebody to be told to type into the incident log as it was being operated the fact that the change to the statehood advice had been made so that everybody could see it?
No, because everybody wouldn't be looking at the incident log. They were taking calls and writing details. No one would be following that incident log. It would be too rapid to keep up with anyway, and that's not the way we generally share information.
Okay. And when you say the messages were then passed on by the CROs to ground units and residents during the 999 calls, did you take any steps to ensure that the change in advice had been received and understood by residents?
Yes.
What steps were those?
So I would imagine you've shown an extract of that call, just going round, making sure that everyone's aware. Like I say, Alex did first. She went round and spoke to everyone individually, told them the changes, told them what advice we were giving now, and that they should pass on to their callers. And then, again, I just take on a more of a supportive role to those CROs, and that's probably, if you can hear me, in the back of Pam's call after that decision had been made.
Okay. Did you take any steps to ensure that residents understood that rescue crews were no longer coming for them?
No.
Why is that?
Because of the distress we perceive that decision and that announcement would make to people, and by giving them a change of decision, and by giving them the new advice, actually the control operators felt more helpful, I believe, with doing that, rather than telling them to protect themselves, which was becoming an impossible task. So a new plan to start telling them to evacuate, start giving them some positive actions to carry out. That would be detrimental by saying that actually crews can't get to you. But I do think some people, some callers, some CROs do imply that during their calls.
Okay. Now, in terms of the change in the stay-put advice communicated to the incident ground, do you remember whether anybody in the incident ground actually participated in the decision, or did they just receive the decision from the control room, you and Adrian Fenton?
I couldn't answer that, I don't know. No.
Okay. I mean, ultimately, whose decision was it?
I raised the decision with Adrian that we should tell people to get out.
Right. So, in terms of responsibility for the decision, did the incident commander have any responsibility for that decision?
No, it was a decision that came from control,
right,
and was passed down to the incident ground.
Okay. Do you remember there being any discussion between Adrian Fenton and the incident commander or the command units about the decision?
I'm sure there was, but again, after we decided, I spoke to Alex. She went round to talk to all her control officers and make sure they're okay, and then I took on a more of a supporting role.
Okay. Can I ask you to look at an LFB document, which is tab 7 of the documents bundle. This is LFB document number 3, which we looked at earlier today. And if you go to page 3, it says in the middle of the page, or just above the middle of the page, in red, 024415, message from incident, CU8 AC row is now IC. First of all, do you remember Assistant Commissioner Rowe taking over as incident commander?
I don't remember the message coming through, but I do remember later on him taking over as instant. So I didn't hear that message, but I did know sometime shortly after.
And then it says 2:45 Est. From this time, London Fire Brigade control operators begin advising those persons trapped in the building to self-evacuate. Do you think that that's correct, that the advice being given by control operators to self-evacuate was given from about 2:45, or do you think it was earlier?
No, I know it was earlier.
Right. And you give that earlier time in your statement as 02:30 to 02:35.
Yes, I believe the first time you hear a control officer advising a caller to get out is about 2:34.
Right. Okay. Now, I think you said earlier that you went round the whole control room, having made that decision to tell control officers what advice to give now.
Alex did. I had a conversation with
Okay.
OM Alex Norman in the middle of the room, and she then went round to
Right.
tell everybody.
Okay. And did she do that straight away? Straight away you'd made your decision?
Yes,
Right. Was that after you discussed it with Adrian Fenton?
yes.
Right. And at page 4 of your statement, coming back to that, you say in the third line, advice, I'm so sorry, it's the second main paragraph which starts the messages. In the third line you say, advice was also given to the CROs that they may need to use more forceful and blunt language to emphasise the necessity to evacuate the building. This would not have been normal procedure, but this was not a normal situation. Why did you think that it was necessary to be forceful and blunt?
As we just established, so some of the callers have been on the phone for a long duration of time. They've initially reported that they can't leave their flats because of smoke in the corridor. That smoke has come in, and they've probably moved from room to room with our control officers trying to give them advice to protect themselves and to stop the smoke entering the room. But that's not working, and the room's getting heavily smoke logged. So, as we've said before, although we don't know and the conditions in the hallways and the stairwell wasn't confirmed to us, we knew that they would be pretty dire with smoke.
Yes, okay. Were you able to track what then happened in terms of the success of people taking that advice?
So sometimes we do. There is a family that stays on the phone to us and leaves their building, goes down to the stairwell and is met by firefighters coming up and are rescued.
Yes, there is. And was there a system in place after the decision was made to change the stay put to all out, whereby control room operators could keep track of callers while they attempted to evacuate?
So I believe several are talking to us in the stairwells. You can hear the change in the environment. It becomes much more echoey. And I think some of them do stay on the phone. I think Heidi's caller as well stayed on the phone to them. And others, you can hear the phone line goes dead, and they abandon the call, as we call it. So they drop the call and the telephone and just leave.
Right. Did you have a system in the control room of recording those who had managed successfully to evacuate and those for whom you had no further information?
No, we just put on the whiteboard that they had been told to leave.
Right. Now, at the end of the third paragraph on page 4 of your statement, you say, you insured, this is the middle of the line, but 4 lines up from the end, you say insured BT, ensured that BT were also spoken to and made aware of the change of advice, so that for ease and speed they could advise residents what to do. We also received a call from Surrey F&S inquiring about the FSG. We advised them of the change in advice, and they kindly spoke to all other fire and rescue services on our behalf. Do you know when you told BT about the change in advice?
Yes. So I think that was shortly after. I was walking around the room, and the critical phone that we talked about earlier, the red phone on the supervisor's desk, rang, and it was BT. I think they were passing information about another call that they'd either sent to the northwest, or I can't recall the detail of the conversation. And I told them that we'd changed the advice and we were telling people to get out. BT, as you know, we spoke about yesterday, connected some of the calls meant for London Fire Brigade to other services, and during that handover period could then inform them that we were telling residents to leave the building. I put the phone down, and Surrey rung, so Surrey Fire and Rescue Service rung. They told us about another caller they had on the telephone. I could look over and see the whiteboard and check that we had the details of that caller. I then told them we were telling people to leave the building, and before they hung up, I asked them if they would ring our other services, surrounding brigades, to tell them.
Right. Now, in terms of ensuring that callers into the control room, either your control room or your buddy control rooms, were kept up to date in terms of the change of the advice, was there a system whereby you could call people back and say, the advice has now changed, you must leave?
No, so we wouldn't have been able to do that because we were still dealing with calls coming in. So our priority would have been to answer those calls. We just ensured that BT were aware when they were handing over to other FRSs, and our surrounding control rooms were also aware. I think I might have asked Surrey to contact North West as well, right, to tell them.
Right. But they would be, to your way of thinking...
They would be the ones that could pass on that information to those callers.
But you say passing them on, they would only do that, is this right, if they were called, not by way of callbacks?
No, if they were called.
Right.
And they were still dealing with calls.
Okay. And that's how you thought of it, is it?
Yes.
Okay. And you said, I think, just to explore this a little bit more, you said in your evidence yesterday that you don't, as a matter of practice, call people back even though you could do, because you have people's mobiles. Yes. And I can give you the transcript reference, or give the transcribers the transcript reference for that, which is yesterday, day 21, page 25, lines 4 to 7, and page 107, lines 9 to 22. That's just for our record keeping. Can I ask you to look at a document, which is a witness statement of a control room operator in Essex called Russ White, which is at MET 000129847. I'm not going to show it all to you, I just want to show you a part of it. This is a statement that he gave to the police in March this year, 11th of March. And he is, I'll just tell you, an employee of Essex Fire and Rescue Services. It looks like you may be familiar with Russ White.
He was a new recruit when I was in charge for watch in Essex.
Right, okay. Well, we may need to explore a bit more about that. But can I just show you page 4 of his statement? There's quite a lot of run-up to this, which I'm not going to trouble you with. But page 4, if I can just get to it. give the number again. It's MET 000012847. That's it. Can I just want to, I'm not going to show you very much of this because he hasn't come yet to give evidence and it's new material. But can I just show you something he says at the bottom of page 4? And he says, at 02:48 hours, I received an abandoned call from a mobile phone. And there's the number partly redacted. Now, we know who that caller is. The caller mentioned to the exchange operator that there was a fire at the tower in London. I informed the exchange operator that I would call this number back as per policy. Now, just pausing there, do you know whether Essex at this time, June 17, had a policy of calling people back?
No, I don't.
Are you surprised to see that he says that there was a policy, if that's what he means by as per policy?
No. As I said, it does happen. It's
Right.
a historic thing, not calling callers back in fire situations due to a landline, and Essex could have created their own policy. Again,
Right.
we have limited national guidance for control rooms, so they could have improved their policy.
Really?
And it would have been a local policy.
Okay, so do you know... So let me just explore this a bit. So London Fire Brigade does not have a policy of calling people back if they need to?
Yes, on occasion, so we will call abandoned calls back, but I was talking about then in a fire situation.
Right, I see, okay. And do other fire and rescue services have policies about callbacks?
Yes, I would imagine some do.
Right.
I couldn't tell you who or what they contain.
But the policy might vary from FRS to FRS? Is that what you're saying?
I would be sure policy would vary from FRS to FRS.
Okay.
Control room.
Right. Okay. Now, he then goes on to say that at 02:50 hours, I tried to contact that caller, but it went through to answer
You want this
phone.
back on the screen, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's up there.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do. So we start at the bottom of page 4. At 02:50 hours, I tried to contact that caller, but it went through to answer phone, stating that the person I was trying to call was unable to take my call. And then he says, at 02:51 hours, we received another call in our control room from the same mobile. I spoke with a male caller who stated that he was in flat 153, Grenfell Tower, and said that the fire was all around him. I asked if he could get to an emergency exit. He replied, no, it's full of smoke. Caller stated that he was on the 18th floor and was unable to get out. And then, if you look a little bit lower down the page, after the reference to the contact with the London Fire Brigade, you see just below halfway down, a London operator said their advice was now to tell all callers to make every effort to leave the building as the fire had spread and it had started on the 4th floor. I then informed the London operator I would contact the caller and ask him to leave the building. The call then ended. Just pausing there, do you remember Essex contacting your control room about the fire in flat 153?
No, that would have been picked up by a control room operator.
Okay. And then at 02:54 hours, I tried to contact the caller from flat 153 again, calling his mobile. There was no answer. A message was left by myself informing him that the London Fire Brigade have asked for him to make every effort to exit the building, go to the nearest fire exit and cover himself and his family in a wet towel and make their way to the fire exit as soon as possible. So that's a message that's left. And then at 02:56 hours, 2 minutes later, I called the caller from flat 153, calling his mobile, and there it is again. The same male answered the phone in a calm manner. I told him that I had spoken with the London Fire Service and they advised him to try and exit the building if he could cover them with wet bed sheets, cloths, and get to the nearest exit. And then there's further discussion about about exiting. Just pausing there. It looks from that as if Essex was able to and did call back this caller and advise him about the change in stay put.
Yes.
Is that something that was that the London control room operators were able to do?
No, purely for the volume of calls. I'm not sure how many calls Essex Fire Service received on our behalf.
Right.
But it would not have been possible for us to begin to call back callers when we had such a vast volume coming in at that time still.
We then have at page 6, Mr. White saying, at 0300 hours I made contact with London Fire Brigade control room and passed details of the caller at 153. The London operator was male and had a Northern Irish accent and said they were already aware of the caller and his location in 153. Just pausing there, can you help identify who the operator was from that description? Male with a Northern Irish accent.
Yes, Peter Dudder.
Okay. I told them he cannot get out and has 4 adults, 5 children with him. The London operator said they were advising all callers to get out, but I told the operator that the male cannot get out. I passed all the details to the London operator and asked them to contact the caller themselves as they know what's happening on the fire ground and where crews are positioned. They may have been in a better position to give the caller advice and reassurance. The London operator said that they would try to call the male. So, on the basis that that's an accurate summation by Mr. White of the call, and we've checked it against the transcript, and it is. Looking at that, when the London operator says they would try to call the male, was that a deviation from the general run of things? A callback like that?
If he felt with that information that he'd been given that that was a priority and that he had time to do that, then I would have said that was the right thing to do. It would have been slightly easier for him than going back over all the calls we had, because I'm presuming Essex would have passed his telephone number over to Peter when he was taking the call, so Peter could just dial that immediately after hanging up from the Essex operator.
Right. Now, we've got that call that Russ White made to Pete Duddy at 03:00 and 10 seconds. And I'll give the reference, but I don't want to take time up taking you through the transcript, but it's LFB quintuple 0557, okay, in case people want to see it. And there is then an admin call line, an admin line called at 03:02:35, so 2.5 minutes or so later, from the control to that mobile number. And the transcript has got the caller and the operator the wrong way round, but don't mind, never mind about that. The advice that is given is essentially, you need to get out, use wet towels, get to the stairwell, and make your way straight out, straight now. So it looks from the evidence we've just looked at that, in summary, Mr. White leaves messages and then speaks to the occupant of 153, and then passes that to London, and then London, Pete Duddy, calls the occupant of 153 back. So my questions are, having taken you through that rather long tour of the evidence, did you know that control room operators were being asked by Essex or other supporting control rooms to call residents back?
No.
You didn't? You didn't know that they were then therefore being given their numbers?
They would always be given their numbers when they passed a call over to us. That's part of protocol. We would always exchange telephone numbers of the caller.
Was there any kind of discussion in the control room about ringing callers back who had called in to update them as to the fire survival guidance that had now changed?
Not with me, but as I say, that would have been very hard because it would involve the control officer going through the incident log, trying to locate those calls and those telephone numbers of those individuals. If you imagine, by this time we've probably got 200 plus calls and call information on the screen to look through, to then go back and find specific ones would have been extremely difficult. I can understand when we run callers back if they had abandoned. So if we'd been given a call by the BT operator and then the BT operators told us we'd abandoned, we could have rung them back then because we have the telephone number live in front of us. And when Essex was passing us information, they would have given the number, so it would have been easier to ring back. But again, the calls were still coming in. They were just doing that as a different task. That wouldn't have been unusual.
Was it that the policy that you described yesterday of not calling people back that stopped you calling people back to tell them the advice had changed, or was it the sheer volume of incoming calls?
It was the sheer volume of incoming calls, but if I said it was a policy that we don't call callers back, that was incorrect. It is a long custom and practice that control do not call callers back that are reporting a fire in their house, in their dwelling.
Right. But we see that Pete Duddy departs from the custom and practice, as you call it, on that occasion.
Yes, and that's been done in the past as well.
And that's been done in the past as well. On the night, was Pete Duddy's action in calling that occupant back a one-off or a rarity?
No, like I say, if the control operator had easy access to those telephone numbers and Essex had said that we'd call the caller back or given some other instruction, we would have followed that.
Could there have been a system whereby, in order to ensure that people who had called before and had been told to stay put could be called back and told the advice has now changed, you must evacuate? Could there have been a system of notification?
Had we
like
stopped answering all other 999 calls, which some would have been for the same building, for the same flats. So it would have been a decision that we would have had to take some call handlers off answering 999 calls to get them to look through the incident and to phone callers back. But what would happen with the other calls that wouldn't go unanswered? Again, you have to remember we don't get any identification about where these calls are coming from. We could easily have picked up another incident, another person's reported fire at the other end of at the other end of London, and we wouldn't have been able to give them advice either, or get fire engines to them had we not answered that. So the priority is always to try and respond to 999 calls that are incoming.
What would happen to those callers who had called, been told to stay put prior to the change in the policy, and who didn't, by good fortune, call back in again? What would happen to them?
Well, all I know is that we wouldn't have had contact with them and been able to tell them the change of advice.
So how would they get to know that the advice had changed, that they should now evacuate if they could?
I don't know. We would have only been able to talk to callers that we were talking to on a one-to-one basis. We have no way of communicating with others and recontacting callers after that change of advice. We wouldn't have been able to cope for that. We wouldn't have been able to do that.
Do you know whether anybody on the incident ground knew that you weren't able to call people back and tell them that the advice had changed, so that they on the incident ground could somehow communicate that themselves?
No, but I believe by this time we were aware that people were going directly to the incident ground and reporting to the command units and handing them telephones when we'd heard that as well. So some calls were being bypassed via our control room.
At page 5 of your...
Mr. Millett, I'm wondering whether it would be sensible to have a short break.
It would.
Soon. Are you going to a different topic?
I'm according to my notes, on a last question.
Oh, well.
Well, it could be 4 last questions, depending.
Would it be sensible for you to...
It would.
Are you all right
also...
if we allow Council to ask a few more questions? At that point, we will have a break because you may need a little time to consider whether there are other things that need to be wrapped up.
Indeed.
Well, was that all right
Okay.
by you? We'll,
Yes.
we'll get the last questions for the time being, at least. All right? Okay. On you go, Mr.
Right. Last questions for the time being. Now, in your statement on page 5, you say that you were involved in bringing in more staff. I just want to show you the top of page 5. You say at the top, I was also acutely aware that we needed more staff, and in particular supervisors, to help assist. I spoke with Adam and Scott and said we needed to ring for more supervisors and those who perhaps live near Stratford who may be able to come in. I began calling staff, those who were not due to be working the following day shift, and leaving messages to see if they were able to assist. I left this job for Adam to continue whilst I moved on to other tasks. What happened? Was that successful? Did you manage to get?
Yes, we did.
How many new people did you get?
We got 2 supervisors,
Who were they?
Pauline Warner and Kate Ranson.
Okay. Is there a system in place to recall off-duty staff in the event that you have a major incident which requires mass attendance of control room staff?
No formal process, no.
So
It would just be goodwill from us ringing them.
Okay. How long did it take Adam Crinian to find the 2 further supervisors?
I don't know. I can't recall. I just knew that he had said to me, or someone had said to me, that Pauline was on her way in and Kate was coming in too.
Was that long? Roughly what time did they arrive, do you think?
I would only be hazarding a guess to say round about 4:30.
Right. Okay. And I know you're guessing, but why do you think it was then as opposed to earlier or later?
Maybe it was a bit before. I seem to remember it being quieter when they arrived.
Right. Yes. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my questions. There are one or two more which I think I'd just like to think about over the very short break.
Yes.
If
Well, no,
that's...
I was going to ask you, is 5 minutes going to be long enough for this purpose, or would you rather have until 20 to 4? I'm offering that on the basis that if we come back at 20 to 4, you won't be too long.
On that condition, I will...
Well, it's not a condition, it's just that the witness might like some encouragement.
That's right. No, yes is the answer. 20 to 4, and I can offer that encouragement.
That's very good of you. Thank you very much. Right, we'll have a break now. We'll come back at 20 to 4. Again, no discussion of your evidence, if you won't mind. And you'd like to go with the usher. Thank you. So we'll break until 20 to 4. Yes, Mr. Millett. Well, have you discovered some more questions?
I have learned of some more questions. And I will do my best to be as economical as possible with them.
Right, thank you. Well, could we ask the witness to come back in, please? Well, Mr. I'm afraid there are a few more questions that council needs to ask you, so
Okay,
I hope you're ready to go on.
That's
Good,
fine.
thank you.
It shouldn't take too long.
okay.
First of all, you say in your statement that you changed the FSG advice to get out within 10 to 15 minutes of your arrival in the control room, and in your statement you put it at 2:30 to 2:35. Before you arrived, did anyone in the control room have the authority or the experience to change the advice from stay put to evacuate?
There were a number of experienced control officers there. I don't think it's a case of having the authority or having the experience. The supervisors were very experienced, as were a large number of control officers on that night. As I said, I think it was just the overwhelming amount of instant details they were dealing with, resources to mobilise, and that was their focus.
Right. Now I'm going to look at, I hope this is okay with you, look at 3 transcripts, parts of transcripts, starting with the first one at 0237, and they all come from the same flat, although they come from different callers. And the first one I want to show you is LFB quintuple 0366. And if we look at the first page, we'll just identify the time of it. It's 0237, and this is from flat 193 on the 22nd floor, the Chucares. And if I can ask you to look within the transcript to page 5 internally. I'll actually probably pick it up at the bottom of page 4 just to give you a little bit more context. At the bottom of page 4 it says, "Is it just smoke coming in at the moment?" That's the operator. And caller 1 says, "There's lots of inaudible, I don't know, inaudible fire from next door." And then the operator says, "Yeah, I understand that, and we are trying to get to you as soon as possible, and we're going to tell the fireman where you are." Caller 1, over speaking, floor is going on to, "What floor is it at, please?" Operator, "Okay, look, I'm going to go now because we've got lots of calls coming in. I'm going to tell them where you are, and you just try and keep yourself safe. Try and stop the smoke coming in. Go to a room that's the least smoky and all stay together. We'll get to you as soon as we can. Okay? Okay. All right, ring us back if it starts catching fire in your house, and we're on." And then lower down the page on page 5, it says, "I'm going to leave you now. Okay." Now, just looking at that advice that I've shown you, was that stay put advice or was that evacuate advice?
No, that was not evacuate advice.
No. Can we conclude from that at 2:37, which is when this call starts, and at least for a few minutes thereafter while this call is in progress, stay put advice is still being given by control room operators to callers?
So I can only assume that maybe when Alex and I were going around talking to control operators, that control operator would have been on the phone at the time and would have immediately picked up another call. So not understood, and we would have spoken to her after.
Right.
I can't be certain.
Okay. So can we conclude from that at 2:37 or shortly after 2:37, you hadn't managed to get around all the control room operators to tell them that the advice had changed?
Again, we would have spoken to everyone that we could have, but if that operator had been on the telephone talking to a caller at the time, maybe they were focused on that caller and wouldn't have picked up us talking to them in the background.
Given that this call was made and started at 02:37, is it possible to conclude from this that in fact the change in stay put advice was not made until after this call?
It was, but I believe there's calls prior to that that have the change of advice.
And then okay. Now, looking at another call, same flat, 193. This starts at 02:43, and this is LFB quintuple 0376. You can see that this call starts at 02:43:55. And if I can ask you to turn to page 4 internally, the operator says at the top of that page, okay, what you need to do if that fire starts coming in or getting worse, you need to get yourself out now, okay? Out where? Out where? Cover yourself, get some out onto the corridors, out your front door. Caller says, we can't, inaudible. We are inside the house, we can't get out the building, there's smoke everywhere, we can't see. Inaudible. Okay, if you go outside your flat, where's your nearest staircase, left or right? Caller says, when I get outside, inaudible, stairs for me, but I can't get to any stairs because of the smoke, we can't see. And then the operator says, okay, well, we are trying to get to you, but it's very difficult. So all I'm saying to you is that if it gets very, very bad, you need to get yourself out of those flats, get all your 8 people out, cover yourself with wet towels, wet sheets, anything, and try to get out, okay? All right. Now, just looking at that advice, is that, how would you characterise that advice? Is that stay put, or is that get out?
No, I would say that's us encouraging that caller in that flat to leave.
Right. The advice looks as if it's conditional, though. All I'm saying to you is, if it gets very, very bad, you need to get yourself out. That's not saying get out, come what may.
No, I think maybe some of the operators were scared that they would put the callers into worse conditions.
Right. So
I think that would be a genuine thought running through the control officer's mind. I think, as we've discussed before, and was brought up in the debrief, there is a hope that fire crews would reach them before they had to leave their flats on their own. I think that's all going through control officer's mind when they're talking to the caller.
Is this an example of what we discussed the first thing this morning as what I think I called stage 2 advice? So not stay put, not get out, but if you're affected by smoke, assess the situation and get out if you can.
They clearly were affected by smoke.
Yes.
As they say it. They've passed on information to get out. But again, I think the operator and all of them, there's a fear in that they don't want to put the caller into a worse position.
Right.
And so on every opportunity they would try and protect him as much as possible. And if the caller had indicated that there was thick black smoke and they couldn't see in the stairwell, the operator rightly would assume that maybe staying where they were is the safest place for them.
Right. But by this stage, sorry to press this, by this stage, 2:43, you had, as you told us earlier, definitely made the decision that they've got to get out.
Yes.
Would you say that this advice that we see 2/3 of the way down page 4 there reflects that decision?
Some of that, I think later on, there's some encouragement. Don't forget, this was a unique situation to us. That decision had never been made before, and we'd never put control officers in that position to tell callers to go into a possibly worse environment to have any chance of surviving. So maybe there was some reluctance initially with some operators that felt uncomfortable with that. and uncomfortable with that decision, but they still have provided them with the information, and then asked them whether that decision to leave or not they felt comfortable with. I think that happened several times through several calls during the evening after the decisions changed.
You can see the advice that's given there, and you can see just towards the bottom of the page, the operator says, OK, I'm going to leave you now. You make the decision whether you think you need to leave or not. All right, OK. Do you think that reflects your decision that you made with Adrian Fenton that callers must now be told to evacuate?
I think that each control officer would have assessed the situation, and I've heard several examples of where individuals have tried to leave and can't, and in that case I don't think there was any, the operator felt that they couldn't then force them out again, and that they would try and protect them as best they could within their flats.
What instruction did you actually give to the control room operators? Did you say, tell them they've got to get out come what may? Or did you say to them, I'll leave it to you to decide what advice to give them?
No, I didn't say I'd leave it to you to decide. I had a conversation with Alex Norman. We said that we would tell callers to leave, to get out the building, and that advice that they should pass on to callers. However, our control operators are trained to make an assessment. So if I'd given the instruction to say regardless, and a caller had said that there was fire immediately outside their front door, I wouldn't have expected them to go through with that.
Right, OK. I'm just trying to get a handle on how accurately the advice that's being given on this call at 2:43 reflects the instructions that you gave the control room operators. And I think what I'm getting from this, and tell me if this is unfair, is that although you told them told them to tell callers to evacuate, they need to get out, nonetheless, control room operators were left with the impression that they still had to make an assessment themselves or ask the caller to make an assessment. Is that a fair summation?
Yes.
Right. So in using blunt, forceful language, it looks from this is that you didn't tell the control room officers to tell callers in blunt and forceful language to get out. It looks like you left them with the idea that they needed to make a more subtle assessment.
No, I would say that was unfair as well. So the conversation I had with Alex was about telling people to leave their properties and leave their flats and get out. Again, how that's translated to someone, and operators are very experienced, so they would provide that advice like she did. Yes, forceful language would be needed. That would be that wouldn't sit very comfortably with some control officers that aren't used to that.
Right.
And they would try and go about it a different way.
Okay.
But I think it's unfair. I think you can, at the end of Pam's call, you can hear me saying that what you think is me, or someone saying that they've got to get out, they've got to leave now, they've got no choice. So I think that message did get across.
Right. It doesn't look as if it got it across, though, at 2:43 to the Chukers in respect of flat 193. Is that?
No, they've definitely had that message because that's what they've given the advice.
And then the final one I wanted to show you is also flat 193, and this is LFB quintuple 5386, which is at 2:51:09. And this is not the Chukers, this is Naomi Lee, who is also in flat 193. We can see that from page 2. This is the same flat with different caller. And she says at the bottom of page 2 that it's very smoky in the room. And the operator says, and it's sandwiched, it would be safer for you to make your way out or to stay where you are query, I can't see you need to decide that for yourself. And then over the page on page 3, the operator says a third of the way down, okay, listen, you can do one of two things. You can either make your way into a room and shut the door, keep the smoke out and stay low, or you can try and make your way out of the building. You have to decide which is safer, okay? If you're going to make your way out of the building, and then it goes on, it does develop, so I don't want to pretend to you that that's the whole of the call, but at that point in the call, is that the communication of evacuate, which you had instructed the control room operators to pass on?
No, they've clearly felt uncomfortable with that, and they've given a range of options.
Right, and again, can you explain why the control room operator was giving a range of options in circumstances where you had instructed the control room operator to tell callers to get out?
No, I can't.
Okay. And then I'm going to do that. And as I did say to you, to be fair to you, that wasn't the totality of the advice. Then it moves, and if you go then on to page 8, it's quite a lot of discussion between the two. It's clear that the discussion evolves, and on page 8, a third of the way down, the operator says, okay, this is after a discussion about towels and blankets. When you've done that, I'm sorry, I'll wait for it to come up on the screen.
Yeah, it's on our screen. Is it on your screen?
I think we may have a problem. We do have a problem. We have a problem with the large screen. Is it on the small? It's on the small screens. It's not on the large screens at the back of the room.
Well, as long as the witness can see the screen, I think that's the main thing.
Well, it is the main thing, but it's also, I think, important that as many people as possible
well, of course
in the room
it is, yes.
can see it. And I don't know whether it's on the live stream. I think. If it's still on the live stream, then we can continue. I'm going to continue, given the hour.
Yeah, I think so.
Chairman. If you look on the screen to your right, Ms. Smith,
yes.
You can see that it says a third of the way down page 8. Okay, and when you've done that, get everyone, one per person, cover themselves up, make sure they cover themselves, and try and leave the building, okay? There's lots of people inside, and the firefighters are struggling to get to everyone, okay? So your best bet is to try and make your way out the building. And then it goes on, halfway down the page, your best bet is to try and get out there. There's a lot of smoke coming in, and the smoke is very dangerous, okay? And the caller says, so what do you want? Do you want us to go? Okay, your best bet is to try to leave, get outside, okay? And that is how the call essentially ends. The operator says at the bottom, are you going to try and do that now? Now, I don't need to ask you. It's clear from that by that stage in the call, very clear evacuation advice is being given by the caller to Ms. Lee. My question is, now we've seen it evolve. This call starts at 02:51, so just after 10 to 3 in the morning. Can you explain why the call starts with the advice being given in the rather more optional way that it was that we saw on page 3? Do one of two things.
No.
No. It looks from this as if the message had got through to the operator that he or she had to tell the caller to get out during the course of the call.
Well, it looks like that from the beginning. If you go back to the beginning, the advice they provide.
Yes.
At the beginning of the
yes, page 2, bottom of page 2, it says, would it be safer for you to make your way out or stay where you are? You need to decide that for yourself.
Yeah, and I thought I saw an area where she gave.
And then page... Yes, and then that's right, page 3, she says, okay, listen, you can do one of two things. You can either make your way into a room and shut the door, keep the smoke out and stay low, or you can try and make your way out of the building. You have to decide which is safer, okay.
Yeah.
Now, we looked at that at that stage, and you said that's not the stay put advice. Sorry, that's not the evacuation advice. that looks
So
like...
that's obviously a mixture of both. So
It's a mixture
she's
of
given
both.
her option
Yeah.
again. So if that decision hadn't been made, I'm not sure she would have said, try and make your way out of the building.
Right.
In her previous calls, you don't hear her say that.
Right.
So
I mean, we can see what the exchange was, and I think your question is whether the witness can explain why there should be an apparent change of emphasis part way through.
Yes.
Can you help with that?
no,
Okay.
I can't recall overhearing her take that call.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got one more question. Now, this is about the television. I'm going to put to you what one of the control room operators has said in a police statement, and obviously we may need to have to explore this with her. This is Sarah Russell. I'm not going to put the actual statement, unless it becomes unfair not to. I'll give the reference. It's MET *0007698. And at page 5, Sarah Russell says that often a TV is on, usually showing the news, so that we know what is going on. We're allowed to have mobile phones with us whilst we're at work, but a lot of the time we do not have the time to look at them. She seems to say or suggest that the television is a useful resource for her work as a control room operator. So having it on helps in terms of handling calls. Would you agree with that?
I don't believe she's saying that. I believe that she's saying that the TV is often on with news that's going on, but with regard to day-to-day business within the control room, the vast majority of incidents, in fact, it would be a rarity that we were dealing with an incident that would appear on the TV that immediately.
Right.
I don't know. Control officers are not trained to interpret images from a TV screen to assess the callers. That's about the one-to-one interaction with the callers.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Smith, you'll be glad to know that I have no further questions for you. Can I just say I'm extremely grateful to you for coming along and having the patience to endure my endless questions. It's been extremely helpful, and I'm very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that I don't have any further questions either. But I do want to thank you very much for coming to give your evidence. You should go away in the sure knowledge you've given us a lot of very helpful evidence. And if I may say so, you've given it in a very calm and measured and helpful way. And one can't ask much more of a witness than that. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, if you'd like to go with the usher, you're free to go, as they say. Thank you. Well done, Mr. Minute. You've finished within the afternoon, which is excellent.
And I finished within the week as well, which is
that's
even more of a triumph.
Probably even more welcome, yes.
Yes. So will you meet again, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, on Monday morning?
Yes.
With our next witness.
And we've got a full programme for 4 days next week, is that right?
We do, yes.
Good.
And our next witness will be Jason Olive.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, as you heard, we'll break there. And we're not sitting tomorrow, so we'll resume on Monday at 10 o'clock. And I'll look forward to seeing most, if not all of you then. Thank you very much.